I trusted them because they were family. That was my first mistake. My name is Margaret, and I was 72 years old when I realized trust can be the most expensive thing you give away too easily. It didn't begin with betrayal. It began with concern, the kind that sounds gentle, the kind that feels reasonable, the kind that makes you doubt yourself before you ever doubt anyone else. I had lived in the same house for over 40 years, raised my children there, buried my husband from that address. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that I had lived a full life. After my husband passed, I stayed, not because I couldn't leave, but because I didn't need to. I handled my bills, I drove myself, I cooked, cleaned, and slept peacefully. I wasn't struggling, but to my children, that didn't seem to matter. My daughter, Claire, started calling more often. At first, I welcomed it. She asked how I was feeling, then what I was eating, then whether I had locked the door at night. Small questions, but they carried weight. My son, Andrew, joined later. He didn't ask questions. He made statements. You shouldn't be alone so much. That neighborhood isn't what it used to be. Things can change quickly at your age. At my age, that phrase crept into every conversation. I laughed it off. I had always been the calm one, the reasonable one. I believed love meant patience. The shift came quietly. One afternoon, Claire suggested she help organize my paperwork. Just to make things easier, she said. Easier is a dangerous word. I told her I'd think about it. The next week, she showed up with folders, already labeled. I felt something tightening my chest, not fear, recognition. She knew where everything was, what everything was worth. She had been paying attention in a way that didn't feel like care. I told myself I was imagining it. That was my second mistake. Andrew called that evening. He said Claire was worried. He said they both were. He said they only wanted to help. Help, I learned, is a word people use when they want access. Access to decisions, access to information, access to a future they believe already belongs to them. The conversations changed after that. They didn't ask what I wanted. They asked what I planned. They didn't listen. They prepared. One night, I overheard something I was never meant to hear. Claire and Andrew were talking in the living room while I was upstairs. They didn't know I had come down early. They spoke in low voices about the house, about timing, about what made sense financially. Andrew said, "We should make sure everything's lined up before something happens." Claire replied, "She won't fight us. She trusts us." I stood frozen on the stairs. They weren't cruel. They were confident. And confidence, I realized, comes from expectation. That night, I didn't confront them. I needed to understand how deep this went. Over the next few weeks, their concern sharpened. Claire suggested I stop driving at night. Andrew asked if I thought about downsizing. They framed it as safety, but safety never asked my permission. I began noticing how often they spoke for me, at doctor's appointments, at family gatherings, even with neighbors. "She's been having a hard time," Claire would say. I hadn't, but I was beginning to. One afternoon, Andrew brought up power of attorney, casually. "Just in case," he said. That phrase again, just in case. I asked him a question. "What case are you preparing for?" He smiled. "You know, life, the thing I was still living." That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table and admitted something painful. I was no longer being included in my own future. I had become a plan. The next morning, I made a decision. I didn't tell my children. I called a lawyer. Not because I was angry, because I was awake, and once you wake up, you can't go back to sleep. The first thing that changed was the way they spoke to me. Not louder, not harsher, simpler. Claire began finishing my sentences. Andrew began answering questions that were directed at me. At first, I corrected them gently. Then I noticed how quickly they moved on, as if my voice were a delay rather than a contribution. The lawyer I met with listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. When I finished explaining everything, he asked a single question. Do you feel pressured to make decisions you wouldn't otherwise make? I answered without hesitation. Yes. He nodded slowly. Then this isn't about aging, he said. It's about boundaries. That word stayed with me. Boundaries. I had raised my children to respect others. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to insist they respect me. I didn't confront them right away. I wanted to see how far they would go if I stopped smoothing things over. The answer came sooner than I expected. Claire started scheduling appointments without asking me first. A financial advisor, a home safety inspector, a real estate agent. She called them conversations. They felt like rehearsals. Andrew joined by phone whenever he could. He spoke in that calm, managerial tone people use when they believe they are being reasonable. We're just thinking ahead, he said. Ahead of whom? I attended one of the meetings. The real estate agent walked through my home, commenting on market value and renovation potential. Claire nodded enthusiastically. Andrew asked about timelines. No one asked whether I wanted to sell. I watched them carefully, not with anger, with clarity. When the agent left, I sat down at the dining table. I'm not selling my house, I said. Claire blinked. Andrew frowned. That's not what we discussed, he said. That's because you discussed it without me, I replied. Claire sighed. You're being emotional. I smiled slightly. No, I said. I'm being present. The tension in the room thickened. They didn't argue. They pivoted. That night, Andrew sent me an email. Articles about elderly scams, stories about people who waited too long to plan. It was framed as education. It felt like persuasion. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. He replied with 2 words, document everything. So I did. Dates, times, what was said, who said it, not to build a case, to protect my memory, because gaslighting thrives where nothing is written down. Claire noticed my distance. She asked why I seemed guarded. I told her the truth, because I don't recognize myself in the future you're describing. She didn't respond. A few days later, Andrew called with urgency in his voice. Mom, Claire's really worried, he said. She thinks you're pushing us away. I took a breath. I'm standing still, I replied. You're the ones moving. He paused. That's not fair, he said. Neither is planning my life without me, I answered. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something that confirmed what I had been sensing. We just don't want to wait until it's too late. Too late? For what? For me to disagree? I realized then that time had become their argument, not because mine was running out, but because they wanted to control the moment before I could change my mind. I made another decision that night. I updated my will. Quietly. I named an independent executor, not my children. I placed safeguards around decisions involving my home and finances. I didn't tell them, not because I was hiding, because my choices no longer required their approval. Claire found out anyway. She always did. She confronted me in the kitchen one afternoon, her voice tight. "You went behind our backs," she said. I looked at her calmly. "I went ahead of myself," I replied. She stared at me as if I had spoken another language. Andrew joined by phone. The shift from pressure to threat happened quietly, not with raised voices, not with ultimatums, with paperwork. Claire arrived one morning carrying an envelope I didn't recognize. She placed it on the counter like something fragile. "We need to talk," she said. Andrew was on the phone already, listening. The letter inside was carefully worded, polite, concerned, clinical. They were requesting a formal evaluation of my decision-making capacity, not because I had failed to pay bills, not because I had been unsafe, because I disagreed. I read the letter slowly, once, then again. "This isn't help," I said finally. "This is coercion." Claire's voice tightened. "We're trying to protect you," she said. I looked up. "From what?" She hesitated. Andrew answered instead, "From yourself." That sentence landed heavier than any accusation. From yourself. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "I won't do this on your terms," I said calmly. Claire's eyes filled with frustration. "Then we'll have to involve professionals." I nodded. "Then we will." They expected fear. They didn't get it. What they didn't know was that I had already spoken to my lawyer about this possibility. He had warned me gently. When control fails, he said, people escalate. He had helped me prepare. I scheduled the evaluation myself, not because I was required to, because I refused to let them frame the narrative. The psychologist was kind, thorough, direct. We talked about my routines, my finances, my understanding of my decisions. At the end, she smiled softly. "You're very clear," she said, "and very aware." The report reflected that, unambiguously. Claire reacted with disbelief. Andrew reacted with anger. They didn't question the process. They questioned my intention. "This isn't how families work," Claire said during our next call. I paused before answering. "No," I said, "this is how power works when it's threatened." The silence that followed was sharp. A week later, another letter arrived. This one came from a law office. They were seeking temporary guardianship, limited, short-term, preventative. I laughed once when I read it, not because it was funny, because it was transparent. They were no longer asking, they were attempting to take. I called my lawyer immediately. He was calm, prepared. "We'll contest this," he said, "and we'll win." The hearing was scheduled within weeks. Those weeks were strange. Friends noticed my focus. Neighbors noticed my calm. I didn't broadcast what was happening. I didn't need sympathy. I needed steadiness. On the day of the hearing, I wore the same coat I had worn to my husband's memorial years earlier, not out of sentiment, out of strength. In the courtroom, Claire avoided my gaze. Andrew sat stiffly, jaw clenched. Their attorney spoke first, framing concern as urgency. My lawyer responded with facts, medical records, financial history, professional evaluations. Then the judge asked me to speak. I stood. "My children believe I am confused because I refuse to do what they expect. I am not confused. I am autonomous." The judge watched me carefully. "Why do you think they're doing this?" she asked. I answered honestly. "Because they've mistaken my age for absence." The judge nodded once. The request for guardianship was denied, decisively. Outside the courthouse, Claire confronted me. Her voice broke. "You chose this," she said. I met her eyes. "No," I replied. "I responded to it." Andrew didn't speak. That was the last time we were all together. The weeks that followed were quiet, not empty, resolved. I revised my estate plans again, not in anger, in alignment. Some things stayed the same, some changed, not to punish, to reflect reality. I also made a decision I hadn't expected. I let go of explanations, of reconciliation on their terms, of guilt. I understood something clearly now. Love that demands surrender is not love, and family that requires your disappearance is not protection, it is control. I was done negotiating my existence. The silence after the hearing was different from anything I had known before. It wasn't tense, it wasn't heavy, it was clean. For the first time in months, no one was trying to manage me, redirect me, or soften me into something more convenient. I woke up without bracing myself. That alone felt like victory. Claire didn't call, Andrew didn't write. At first, I wondered if that absence meant punishment. Then I realized it meant recalibration. People who expect control often retreat when it's taken away. I returned to my routines, morning walks through familiar streets, coffee at the same small table by the window, books read slowly, without distraction. Friends noticed the change in me. Not that I was louder, that I was steadier. One afternoon, a neighbor asked how my children were doing. I smiled politely. "They're living their lives," I said. "So am I." That answer surprised even me. I had spent so long defining myself in relation to others that independence felt almost unfamiliar. Almost. I met with my lawyer one final time to finalize everything: the will, the trust, the protections. He asked if I wanted to revisit any decisions. I didn't hesitate. "No," I said, "this reflects who I am now," because that was the truth. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. Some of my estate would go to my children, some would go to organizations that protect the autonomy of older adults, some would be used to support causes I had quietly cared about for years. Not as a statement, as a reflection. Weeks later, I received a letter from Andrew. Not legal, not accusatory, just a few lines. "I didn't understand before. I still don't fully, but I hope you're okay." I read it carefully. Then I placed it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because I no longer needed closure to live well. Claire never reached out. I stopped waiting. Waiting had been a habit I no longer needed. On my 73rd birthday, I woke early and sat by the window as the morning light moved slowly across the room. I thought about the woman I had been when this began, afraid of disappointing others, afraid that asserting myself would mean being alone, afraid that love would disappear if I stopped being agreeable. She had been wrong. Standing my ground hadn't isolated me. It had introduced me to myself. I had learned that autonomy is not selfishness, it is dignity. That care does not require control, and that family bonds do not justify erasure. If you are listening to this and feeling your voice grow smaller, your choices questioned, your independence reframed as risk, please hear this. You are allowed to be present in your own life. You are allowed to say no without explanation. You are allowed to protect what you built. Even when pressure comes disguised as love, even when concern carries conditions, your life does not belong to the future others imagine for you. It belongs to you, here, now. And that is enough.